Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. Today we're talking about baking soda, how it actually works, whether it's useful or harmful, and what you can realistically expect from it, and what you shouldn't. There's a lot of interest in this topic. People are basically promising miracles. It sounds great, cheap, accessible, and effective. But let's break it down. What's true, what's false, and does any of this actually make sense? Does it actually have some basis?
Let's start with some common myths. Here is a small collection. Baking soda can alkalize the body. Baking soda can change blood pH. Baking soda can de-acidify the body. Viruses, bacteria, and cancer cells die in an alkaline body. You can find even more claims if you look for them. It all sounds believable, but it's not that simple. The human body isn't a cake. It's a very finely balanced system. Your body tightly controls blood pH in a very narrow range, about 7.35 to 7.45. Even small changes can cause serious problems, and in extreme cases, they can be life-threatening without medical help. So it's hard to imagine what would actually happen if your pH changed enough to kill viruses, bacteria, and cancer cells.
Now let's move from myths to reality. Baking soda is a simple substance that works through very complex mechanisms. Even a specialist would need hours to fully understand them. In 2018, a study published in the Journal of Immunology looked at what happens when people take 2 grams of baking soda per day. In the description, I will leave links to scientific sources for those who want to read more in detail. Participants dissolved 2 grams in about 250 milliliters of water and drank it slowly. Just regular room temperature water, because heating can slightly change the chemical balance of the solution. So what did the researchers actually find?
Well, taking 2 grams of baking soda per day led to a reduction in the inflammatory activity of macrophages. At the same time, it increased the activity of regulatory T cells, the ones that help suppress autoimmune responses. Macrophages also reduced their production of pro-inflammatory cytokines, including TNF-alpha, interleukin-6, and interleukin-1 beta. At the same time, regulatory T cell activity increased. All of this together led to a reduction in chronic inflammation. As a result, taking 2 grams of baking soda daily led to a noticeable reduction in inflammation in the volunteers. And that's important because inflammation is one of the key processes that slowly damages the body and drives aging.
So how does baking soda actually do this? Here's a very simplified explanation. Your immune system doesn't just turn on by itself. It needs a trigger, and that trigger comes from so-called sentinel cells, mainly macrophages. These cells are spread throughout the body and are the first to encounter threats like bacteria and viruses. But they don't only react to external threats, they can also be activated by internal signals. For example, oxidized apolipoprotein B in blood vessel walls can trigger these immune cells. Macrophages can exist in 2 states. The first is M1. This is the state where they release chemical signals like interleukins that attract other immune cells. For example, when bacteria or some foreign substance enters the body, an M1 macrophage recognizes the threat and releases signals that summon other immune cells, like a swarm gathering at the site of invasion to destroy the threat. But after the threat is gone, debris remains, and M1 macrophages may continue to treat it as something dangerous, keeping the inflammatory process going.
This continues until M2 macrophages arrive. M2 macrophages are the opposite. They suppress inflammation and help shut the process down. So M1 macrophages are responsible for starting inflammation, and M2 macrophages are responsible for stopping it. And this is exactly what was demonstrated in the study with 2 grams of baking soda. So how does baking soda influence all of this? There are several possible mechanisms. The first involves changes in stomach acidity. When you take baking soda, acidity decreases, and that sends a signal through complex pathways to the spleen. The spleen is one of the key organs where immune cells can switch states. It shifts macrophages from the inflammatory M1 state into the anti-inflammatory M2 state.
The second mechanism is related to a hormone called gastrin. When stomach acidity drops, gastrin is released, and its job is to increase gastric acid production. So baking soda lowers acidity, and gastrin pushes it back up. And that increase in gastrin activates the spleen, again shifting macrophages toward an anti-inflammatory state. Finally, the third mechanism suggests that baking soda may affect the acid-base balance of cerebrospinal fluid. This triggers a series of processes that ultimately signal the spleen through nerve pathways, again shifting macrophages from an inflammatory to an anti-inflammatory state.
Although we don't know exactly which pathway is responsible, and it could be several working together, they all seem to lead to the same place, the spleen. So why does everything point to the spleen? Because of something called the splenic inflammatory reflex. A reflex is basically a standard response of the body to a stimulus. For example, when a neurologist taps your knee, your leg moves automatically. Something similar happens here. We have the vagus nerve, the 10th cranial nerve, whose sensory fibers are spread throughout most of the digestive system, including the stomach. When a person takes 2 grams of baking soda, it stimulates these nerve fibers.
That signal is then sent to the spleen, which begins switching macrophages. This is the splenic reflex, and baking soda acts as one of its triggers. In simple terms, baking soda affects the spleen, and the spleen shifts immune cells into an anti-inflammatory mode.
Now that we understand the mechanism, let's talk about side effects. What actually happens if someone takes 2 grams of baking soda every day? After all the hype about its benefits, people also started talking about risks. Things like disrupting acid-base balance, causing potassium loss, increasing sodium load. Some of these claims sound pretty extreme, but if you understand how acid-base balance works, the picture looks very different. For a healthy person, taking 2 grams per day is roughly similar to drinking about half a liter of alkaline sodium bicarbonate mineral water, or even just breathing deeply. Mineral water also brings in sodium and bicarbonate, basically the same thing as baking soda. And deep breathing also shifts the body toward alkalinization. These changes are quickly compensated by the body, so for a healthy person, they are practically unnoticeable.
So let's sum it up. First, baking soda appears to have a real anti-inflammatory effect. Second, in small amounts, its side effects are roughly comparable to drinking mineral water. Third, it's already used in medicine, for example, in chronic kidney disease. So it is quite widely used, and there is no particular reason for concern. Can baking soda slow aging? Right now, we don't know. That would require large-scale studies, and none have been done. At this point, it's just a theoretical assumption. More research is definitely needed. So for now, there are no official medical guidelines for using it. At the same time, there's no evidence of harm at a dose of 2 grams per day.
Friends, we've come to the end of this video. If you liked it, leave a comment. If you didn't like it and think it should be different, feel free to share your opinion. Maybe you've tried baking soda yourself. If so, share your experience in the comments. And if you know someone who thinks baking soda is a miracle and works for everything, send them this video. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.